Welcome to Estonians in Tasmania. On this video, brothers Mart and Peter Kruup talk about the Kruup family. The interviewer today is Kitty Kruup.
Thanks for making the time for this interview. Now, I want you to both just explain your links to Estonia, please.
I think really our links to Estonia as a country are not particularly strong. I mean, we've both been there, and my impression was that there was certainly not the place that I'd want to be living in. I think our links with Estonia to some extent is the Estonia of the 1930s, because that was the one thing that I really realised when I was in Estonia, that out here the people were still living in the 30s mould.
Well, the language was definitely 1930s.
Well, I think there's two languages. I think there's sort of a domestic version that people used to use around here in homes. Yeah. And I think there's a formal version as well, because I think it might have been the first time I went back with Dad, they'd all of a sudden sprout out in this language that, yes, I understood, but it was a very formalised sort of words.
I think we had kitchen Estonian here, which was used in the domestic family situation, which it's like, we had all the words for all the food, and we were talking about food a little earlier, and it's a very important thing to Estonians. But like Mart says, I don't have a very strong connection to Estonia now. I don't. I've been there twice, and I don't have a desire to really be much involved with it.
Yeah, but your connection is obviously through your parents.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's right.
And they're both Estonian, which is a bit different to some of the other people we've interviewed or that immigrated. They got married here. Well, Mum and Dad got married in Germany. So they're both born in Estonia. They got married in Germany. Yeah. So that's the link, a double Estonian link.
And what were they doing when they met each other? Under what circumstances?
Don't know.
Well, Dad was working as an intern in the Freiburg Hospital.
Yeah.
And Mum was a student, wasn't she? She was a biology student, and she talked about, attending. So she must have gone to Freiburg University, I would think.
But where they actually met and anything of that, and how, and the marriage, and I was never told.
Mum was, I do recall that Mum was at first reluctant to go out with Dad.
Yeah.
And Dad persisted.
Right.
Like Dad kept on sort of asking her out or something until she ultimately agreed. Cause
what happened was they were in the French zone.
Yes.
And at the end of the war, they were displaced persons in the French zone, and it depended very much on where you were living as to where you ended up. In that, grandmothers and the Tupses in New York were living in the American zone, so consequently ended up in the American zone.
Okay.
The English were taking immigrants back because there were people, I know that Mum, when they went over there to visit, when Dad did that St Andrews sabbatical.
In 1973?
Yeah, Mum caught up with people she'd met from the past there, I think. But they were in the French zone, and so, of course, I don't think the French were doing much because they had enough problems with the world as it was. And so Arthur Corbell went to Europe to recruit young, married, white, single people without kids to emigrate to Australia.
And they were called the Beautiful Bolts.
Oh, well, there you go.
But that's a bit of Australian government propaganda.
Yeah. And what they did was they got the train down to Naples. And then came by ship from Naples.
They went to Pompeii.
Yeah, that's near Naples.
Yeah.
And on the way out, Dad taught English to all the people on board.
Yeah.
And, of course, was paid in cigarettes because everybody got paid in cigarettes. They didn't smoke, so they were used as further trade for other things, but I don't really know what. And I think they landed in Perth as the first contact, but ended up in Melbourne, and then were taken by train up to Bonegilla.
Bonegilla, yes.
I have actually been to Bonegilla, and it was a very interesting place to have
we should put that on the list, Kit.
Yes.
Yeah.
To have a look at.
Yeah.
There is a huge migrant resource because it was used for immigrants into Australia right through till about the 60s and 70s. Went on forever. But there's a map there of the whole camp, and the camp consisted of probably 20 or 30 blocks where people lived. Now, the blocks had accommodation, had kitchens, had dining halls, etc. So each block was sort of self-contained, and there is one block left up there that you can have a look at.
Okay.
And were couples able to stay together?
Yeah,
or
I think
were
the
they
couple
separated?
stayed together.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
At the camp, it was different later on, of course, but
Well, and
At New
then,
Norfolk,
and then the one story about Mother used to talk about was they went into Albury, and Albury's about 20 or 30 k's from Bonegilla. They went in to buy slippers. However, their English was not as terrific as it could have been. So they were asking for night shoes and were shown, night shoes, evening shoes. But then at that stage, I think they wanted young married couples again in Tasmania. So they all came. There were some of them that came down here, including Mum and Dad, and they lived at the Brighton Army Camp.
So what year did they arrive out in Tassie?
49?
I'm not sure.
I think it was 49.
I reckon you could find it out.
If
somewhere.
not 49, they got here at 50.
Yeah. Well, you got to work to work out what they actually did. You might work back from my birthday.
Yes.
In that
your birthday was 1951.
I was born in 51,
June,
which meant that Mum must have got pregnant sometime in September or October the previous year.
1950.
At which stage they were working at New Norfolk Quarry.
Yeah.
And the theory was that if she was pregnant, she didn't have to
work anymore.
Yeah.
And the bond was let go. Whereas Dad kept going with his work in the as an orderly.
He was an orderly, even though he was trained as a doctor in Germany. Yeah.
So I reckon they would have come down here in 49 or something
End
like
of
that.
49, I reckon.
Yeah.
Remember we attended that gathering, the Ukrainian gathering, and they were talking about the first people to arrive here, and I think that was around 49.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But I've got the immigration papers for them at home somewhere. I'm not sure where it is. But you can find all the paperwork relating to their immigration as to who they were, and also for Grandma and Grandpa as well. In that they arrived but were not required to work because they weren't seen as immigrants on their own entity. They were seen as immigrants attached to other.
Did they come out at the same time?
They all came out at the same time.
They were my mum and dad,
And they moved to Sydney.
Yeah.
And
they moved to Sydney first, didn't they?
Yeah, they went to Sydney first and were somewhere out near a place near Yagoona, which is one of the outer suburbs, because many years later, when I was in Sydney with Grandma, we went out to visit people, and she got lost on the trains, but I got there, but this must have been, I'm not sure what year that was, but it was. I tried to work it out the other day. So they were in Sydney, and he was a master tailor, and she was a seamstress, and they had the money.
They had the money, yeah.
They had the money because I think he still worked as a tailor, particularly in Sydney, although I don't know that he ever did much in Hobart.
I've got his tailoring table from Station Street downstairs, and I've put my models on it, and I've carried that around everywhere
as a photograph of it.
Yeah, we have to take a photo if it's covered with rubbish. But yeah,
I've got a silver shot glass that has a date of his.
I remember that.
Yeah, and it was a celebration of 40 or 50 years of doing stuff, but it must have been from when he was about 13.
Yeah.
When you looked at his date of birth and then you looked at when this was issued to go back, he must have been indentured as an apprentice at about 13.
Yeah. Which they would have been in those days, wouldn't they? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And but when they were here, Grandma used to make vests. Vests.
She used to work, yeah.
She used to work piecemeal there were two tailors in Hobart she worked for. One was Morgan's and the other one was Leslie's. Now, Morgan's was in Murray Street, just down from Collins Street there, and Leslie's was upstairs, further down Murray Street above where the Tatler used to be. Because I can remember occasions when I would be taken into the city by Grandma to drop off vests she'd made and pick up materials for new ones.
I was going to ask, how did you get in? Was it by tram?
It must have been, but I can't remember it.
Because my mum used to tell me I did travel on a tram as a very small infant. They finished in 1960. You must...
I know.
Born in 51, you must have had memories of them.
I have no memories.
You don't have them?
Of going in on the tram.
Okay.
Because I was watching a
Oh, it could have gone by train.
Oh, yeah, but I was watching a YouTube presentation on the trams of Hobart actually last night or the night before, and I sat there and I could not remember. I can remember the tram shed next door.
Yes, I remember that too, when it was used for buses.
I also remember the mother being mugged coming down the lane.
Oh no.
You know, there was that little thin lane between the Hutchinson's place and the bus door, which is still there, by the way. Anyway, she was wheeling a pram, so it must have been you. And had her handbag stolen out of the pram.
Deepest, darkest Myrna.
And I can remember the cops being called there. It must have been fairly early on.
Yeah.
Gee whiz.
Early 60s, 61 or something.
So what did your dad go on to do? You said they were both working up at the
Dad did his 2 years up there.
It was called Lackland Park then, I believe.
It was called Lackland Park.
Yeah.
I don't know. But then he moved down to Hobart and he worked in what was the chest hospital, which is over in St John's Park there somewhere.
Yeah.
And where at that stage he went back to uni and his story used to be that he could get away with working full time out at the chest hospital as an orderly and also doing university full time. Which he did for 2 years.
He did psychology because it was on at 4 o'clock, and philosophy because it was on at 5 o'clock, and got majors in those.
Yeah.
And then the honours year he did full-time honours and full-time work. I don't know how he possibly could have done it.
So he worked really hard by the sounds of it.
Oh, he was just a very intelligent man who, you know, the stuff he was doing was probably just about second nature to him, and you know, it wasn't that much. But he also, I think he had a year where he did a dip ed, where he had a dip ed scholarship, the education department.
That's right, he got paid, didn't he?
Got paid for a year.
And in those days, those dip ed scholarships were pretty good.
Oh, they all were. And then after that, he came out and he worked at Newtown High as a science and maths teacher and soccer coach.
Yes, now tell me the story. This is a story I have heard from you, Peter. Maybe you'd like to share that
Well,
For
I
the
think
interview.
it goes like that. That they said, well, you're from Europe, you can be the soccer coach. Dad didn't know anything about soccer, so he got a book and learned it from the book. He had some very talented players, and they won the premiership or whatever they won. And one of those players in that soccer team actually taught me at Turina Primary School in 1970. Parks was his name, Ken Parks. So, and he could remember my dad as a soccer coach. So there we go. It's a small city, Hobart, but yeah. So Dad, well, I think he was proud of that, but I don't think he was that interested.
But I think the teaching was fine. I mean, he could walk to Newtown High from Myrna.
Yes. And he did maths and science. I think he taught.
I think he taught maths and science, but I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
But they lived there at number 6 Station Street. They must have moved in there, in the early 50s. Now, Station Street was a very interesting block of dirt in that at the front of the block on Station Street, it was one normal block wide, and the house was there. And at the back of the block, it was about 5 or 6 houses wide.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It was really wide.
Yeah, I recall it being big.
Really big out the back.
It was like a big wedge, wasn't
We had
it?
chickens.
It was like a big wedge.
We had chickens, didn't we?
We had chickens. And we had lots of fruit trees and some serious fruit trees that were sort of probably 20 or 30 feet high. Because I know I fell out of one time.
Yeah, I remember them being big.
They were
and
big.
Climbing or something. Yeah.
And so the house basically was, you walked into a front porch. Off to the right was an enclosed veranda that was actually a sunroom.
Yes, and I remember that sunroom because that was the sunroom I used to sit in a lot and look at the trains.
Yeah.
And hence my fascinations for trains, because I grew up next to a railway station.
Yeah.
We don't have them anymore.
And was there much of an Estonian community then? Did you have many Estonian people come and visit? Do you remember that? Were there gatherings there?
Well, as part of this building, there was a huge triple garage, because the previous owner of the house was actually involved in transport. And what they did, this thing was, it would have been probably 3 garages wide and about 4 or 5 deep.
It's huge.
And what they did was they enclosed the front of it, and it became Estonian House in Hobart.
Ah, okay.
And so they would have events in there. I can't really remember too much of them. I do recall that one of them, they had lots of gum trees all through the roof. And everybody who was an Estonian was invited, and they rocked up, and I suspect that even some of the ones from Launceston arrived as well. And it might have been a New Year's Eve effort, that one, just something in the back of my mind.
There's a few photos around, but there was strong links to the Launceston Estonians. Mum and Dad had very good friendships with the Aasas and the Simmels and the Kartus. Endel Kartus was my godfather. So they had pretty good links up north.
The main reason for connection between most Estonians, both in Hobart and Launceston, was the half-yearly church service.
Right, yes, I do remember that. Buster Aasa as one.
What they used to do was every 6 months the Lutheran minister, the Estonian Lutheran minister from Melbourne, would come over and hold a church service, and there'd be one in Hobart and there'd be one in Launceston. And then the one in Hobart used to always be out at St Mary's Church out at Myrna there in Springfield Avenue, opposite the bus MTT.
Yeah, but I also remember one in South Hobart in the Lutheran Church.
There have been once the Lutheran Church got established up there, but that would have been
much later.
A lot later. That would have been probably in the 70s, if not more later.
I remember you did a very famous rescue mission there, whereby the pastor's luggage ended up in Launceston Airport, and you, being a young, keen chap, volunteered to quickly drive up to Launceston, get his luggage, and come back so he could give the service.
Yeah, well,
that was
my dubious nature was that by doing that I would get out of going.
Right.
Because I really probably once I became a teenager, which would have been in the 60s and early 70s, I did not particularly need to go.
Yeah, they were pretty rough going. These Estonian services were all in Estonian.
Oh yeah, that was all right.
And the language was interesting, like always.
Fine.
But it was just.
The services used to have Betty Clausen playing the organ.
Oh, of course. Now I remember. Yes, she used to play. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
And they weren't terribly good singers until the pastor got up and sang, because he sang brilliantly. And
okay.
I think it must have been one of the job criteria for ministers that they could actually sing quite strongly.
Yeah. And I do remember him singing. Yeah.
So what role did your parents play in the association? Did they have...
Oh, Dad was president forever.
Yeah. He started it and just kept on going, and I've got those old financial records still.
Yeah.
So how long was he president for?
I think 51 it started, did it? Or maybe not,
no,
maybe 54.
Would have been 54, I reckon.
Yeah.
I've got a record so we can put a little subtitle.
Yeah, I reckon once it...
yeah, it was 54, I think.
Once they moved into
Hobart.
Station Street.
Yeah.
I reckon.
Yeah.
But when they used to be church, now church always used to be on Saturday in Hobart because he'd go to Launceston on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And after church, I mean, this was the soul-saving grace for us, there would be a do.
Yeah, there'd be a real big, what we call a bun fight, but, lots of merriment, lots of eating.
There was the incentive to attend.
There was.
Yeah.
But I can recall them being at the Clausens in Sunderland Street.
Yes.
And there was Mrs. Sopchak up in Union Street up in West Hobart. Now, she was Estonian, but he was something else.
Polish?
Could have been.
Don't know.
Could have been. And then there was Sina, of course.
And her daughter Evie, who only recently died.
Did she?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and their kids are all dead from earlier on.
Yeah.
I can't remember where others might have been.
So, of course, I remember vividly Tanya and Frank Lehon. And
yeah, but would have they had any of the Estonian dues at their place? Because at that stage,
not at that stage.
That stage, they were living in Argyle Street.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there was ever too much more as a whole entity other than these 6 monthly events. I don't know what you can recall.
Well, I mean, later on, and my memory's sort of very recent, when I came back in 2003, and there'd been the big sort of tradition, and they used to have one meeting at the Migrant Resource Centre, and that had the barbecue, and we still have the barbecue today.
What barbecue? Could you explain about the barbecue?
The barbecue's like an annual general meeting for the Estonian Association of Tasmania, and we've had that for a long time, but I don't know how long it must have started at some stage.
Yeah, I don't think it happened in the 50s.
No.
Or even the 60s.
Yeah.
There was another gathering during the year that you held as well.
Yarny Bath.
Yeah, well, see, that's June.
Yeah, so it could be
and that
church.
would have been the June Christmas or the June church service. Could have been round that area.
Around that time,
They wouldn't. I don't recall them having a separate event for it. Yarny Bav is the 24th of June, a very auspicious occasion. But yeah.
Now, Peter's often chatted to me about stories from the past, and I do recall one particular story to do with a butchered sheep in a suitcase.
Well, that goes back to World War One.
But nevertheless, it's an interesting story to
Do you know this
recall.
one? Or I'll go. Okay. Well, this is the beauty thing about doing this is you get a couple more stories as well. But so World War One, it was Russia. Estonia was part of Russia, and the Germans were basically trying to get Russia to surrender. So the Germans did occupy Estonia. And our grandfather on my dad's side was a pretty clever man. He learnt to drive and fix cars in the 1930s, and anyway, he's also pretty industrious. And for some reason, there was a food shortage, and he wanted to take a sheep from his farm in the centre of Estonia to Tallinn, and he took it on the train. Of course, it was highly illegal to transport food, unauthorised food. I think grandfather was taking it to relatives who needed the food, or maybe he was just making some sort of trying to make some profiteer out of it. Anyway, so the German patrol was on the train, and they were sort of interrogating his papers and all that, and they asked him, "Well, what's in that suitcase there?" And he said, "Well, it's actually a whole sheep. I've actually put a whole sheep into that suitcase." And he thought, honestly, and they said, "Oh, for sure, don't kid us, go on, get out of here." And so that was the story of grandfather that was told to me maybe in latter years. But I think Dad did talk about one or two other things in latter years as well. And
I thought the most interesting, if we're going back into that sort of history, I thought the most interesting bit was out at the farm in Estonia, where after World War II, where all the land was collectivised and put into communes, the family kept the house, and the family was also entitled to grow a strip of potatoes being particularly important in the Australian diet. And what happened was that the every year before the potatoes were planted, the collective's tractor would come down and plough up your strip of dirt. Well, it never turned round on your property, it always turned round on the collective's property. So this 100 metres of potatoes over a number of years became about 200 metres.
Right.
Yeah.
And, they used to grow potatoes there every year.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. No.
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 I don't know where it was, but,
Yeah.
I mean, the farmhouse that it was...
Well, I went back in 2001 and we went back there in 2018, but it had been totally and utterly changed because people had new owners, and it was unrecognisable in 2018. But 2001, it was still looked like a country farmhouse, and we went up into the loft and do that.
Now, I've seen a photograph of your father on a horse, and I believe there's a story behind that as well.
Yeah. Do you
want to share it?
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is so. Dad was born in 1920. He was, I think, he had to do a year or 6 months of national service, and he was posted to the Estonian cavalry in Tartu. I've actually looked at those the grounds at Tartu, where he was very fortunate in that he had a very good horse, which Dad wasn't. Even though he came from the country, he wasn't that much of a sort of a country boy. I think he's more an academic. And but he rode on this horse, and it was, he did all right on it. Rode around nice. And somebody probably set as sort of one of his superior officers, sort of sensing that he might be more useful in the office than on the horses anyway, said, "Oh, you're doing that well. You can come and work in the office." Now that was very fortuitous because 1939 was phenomenally cold winter. It was the same year as the Winter War with Russia against Finland, and Russia got really stopped by Finland because of the extreme cold, and so Dad was very grateful of being in the office during that very, very, very cold winter. But so that's that story. We got the photo, which will scan
I thought the story was that in actual fact he was in the cavalry section, and on a particular day they brought in a horse and they sat him on it and took the picture, and that was about it.
So that was about it. Okay.
He'd never actually rode the horse ever.
Oh, right. So it's just there. But I've got 2 photos of it, which was sent by our uncle.
But I think the interesting story that I used to hear about that period was when he got the mumps.
Oh.
Apparently, he got him and the rest of his platoon or whatever it was got the mumps. They all got quarantined for 2 weeks in the hospital, and then they got 2 weeks leave to recover from the mumps.
Oh, well, so there's a couple more. Can we continue on the World War II stories, and then
I think
and then we'll jump back into
the other thing I was going to just remind you about is in your dad's final years, he would often reminisce about the past, and you
a little bit
heard for the first time about his experiences in a prison camp.
Yeah, that's right. There was a couple of experiences there that he. First of all, I went to Gießen once, which is a town near Koblenz. And I caught the train there, and Dad said, "Oh, Gießen, yes. Oh, yes, I have fond memories of Gießen." And I said, "Oh, why is that, Dad?" He said, "Well, Gießen, they were going to send me to the Eastern Front because he was in the German army at that stage. But apparently there was some rule saying if you'd done 4 years of study, you wouldn't be sent to the Eastern Front. You'd complete your last year of university if you're in the German army."
That was to become a medical doctor.
To become a medical doctor. And the commanding officer said, "Yes, correct interpretation of the rules. Off you go and study." So that inevitably saved his life. But he was wandering around. He tried to find, just before the war finished, he did try to find that unit. Eventually it was in Prague, and he wandered back into Bavaria where there was no food at all, but he stayed he got billeted by greengrocers, and then he got captured by Americans. But that went quite well for him, as well as these things can go, because the Americans said to him, "Hey, you're not German. You can speak English," because Dad could at that stage speak English. You could speak English. "Oh, you must be okay." And so they said to him, "Well, how about teaching your fellow prisoners of war, most of whom weren't German anyway, some English?" And that links in with he taught
on the ship on the way out.
And that last bit of story wasn't recounted directly by Dad, but that was recounted to my friend Tony, who took him out to a big sort of boozy lunch, and Dad had to sort of chuck in good stories to and I wasn't there. But apparently that was what happened.
Your dad must have been in German uniform when he was captured.
Oh,
for want of a better word. Yeah.
I know very little about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the one thing I'm not quite sure how they actually got from Estonia to Germany. In that they weren't separate. I mean, at that stage they were separate.
Well, Mum went with Mum and Dad, and I think they had to bribe German officials to get on freight wagons, and they just left it very late, and they managed to just get in front of the Soviet army. At one stage, the Soviet army had blocked off a bit of, I think it was near Lithuania, but then the Germans had to get their own troops out, and that means they could get out as well. And they went as far as they could, but that's sort of the only vague recollection. Dad, of course, was in the German army by that stage, so he was just evacuated from Estonia because he was in the German army as a medico.
Because you see, he was born in 1920.
Yeah.
So in 1940, he was 20 only.
Yeah, but he went to Tartu University and did quite a few years of his doctor there, and then finished it off. And so it's very, very interesting, sort of piecing it all together. But it's a very dramatic sort of time. Anyway,
getting back to
yes.
to Tasmania. I guess they progressed along out at Station Street, and I reckon there was probably more. I mean, Station Street, they were there to 64, we decided. And I reckon there was probably many ado there, both inside and outside, and, parents' and grandparents' significant birthdays, and Estonians probably would have been there for all of those. I mean, you know, there weren't that many Estonians in Hobart, I don't think, but, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I thought 30, roughly.
Yeah.
Because that's how many members we had when they bothered to collect the subs, about 30. But some of those weren't Estonians. They were spouses of Estonians or whatever.
Well, there were no other, what I call pure Estonians there, where both parents were Estonian in Hobart.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I mean...
What about the roots?
Oh, the first lot of roots would have been...
First lot, yeah, not Gloria.
Lot,
yeah,
not
George remarried Gloria, who definitely wasn't Estonian.
Yeah, there would have been Esther.
Who's still about, who I met in Richmond a few months back.
There's Anne. There was Anne Root. And there was a...
Yeah,
Victor. Not that we had that much ever to do with them, with those kids either.
No, I remember Esther.
Yeah. And then there was the Clausens, Jan and Betty.
Well, Betty was Australian.
Betty was Australian, and in fact...
As children, what language did you speak mainly? What did you speak first?
I spoke Estonian until I went to school.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
And but that was mainly because in those first 4 or 5 years, Mum and Dad were both working somewhere on the line, and I was virtually brought up by my grandparents until I was about probably 5. The story went that Mother took me. I went to kindergarten. And the story goes that I was taken out there and my mother said, oh, well, he doesn't speak any English, when I would have been about 4 or something like that. And what she'd forgotten, of course, or what she didn't realise was that the 2 boys next door to in Myrna, I used to knock about with them in that era. There was the Friersons were next door. There was a railway house. And the father was a train driver.
Oh, right.
And, you know, my English was probably a bit more than what my mother thought.
And what about you, Peter?
Yeah, I remember speaking Estonian at home, and I think, you know, watching television, I had some English, but I remember I had to learn how to ask to go to the toilet and a few other things, which I simply didn't know in English. But I don't think it was much of an issue, but... I think my English is it's my weakest subject, really. I mean,
Well, it's a second language.
It's a second language.
Both of us.
Yeah, it is a second language for both of us, so which is very interesting.
And your skills in that second language really didn't develop until much later in life when they had to.
Now, your parents ended up in Taroona.
Yep.
Oh yes, that was exciting. They built their own house. Very exciting.
Well, Mr. Jennings built the house.
Mr. Jennings, well, yeah, but to have a new house, I think, was very, very exciting.
Well, I think what they were doing was looking to move away down there somewhere to live close to the university, and they found the 4 blocks up to the corner were all empty down there.
This is in Norwood Avenue, Taroona.
In Norwood Avenue, yes. Up to Flinders Esplanade corner, all 4 of them were empty, and they bought one which at that stage had a creek flowing through the middle of it, or at least a creek bed. Don't know that it ever got wet. And they contracted Jennings to build the house, and it was a standard Jennings house of some description, but they put that extra room on the back for Grandma.
Okay.
And they kept a lot of trees. Mum wanted to keep the trees.
Had to keep the trees.
So she tied white ribbons around. I remember all these white ribbons tied around trees so the builders wouldn't knock them down. There was a lot of trees initially, and a big pine tree at the back.
Yeah.
And I always remember the garden, whenever I came around, always seemed to have dill growing in it. What's the significance of dill?
Well, dill you put on your potatoes.
Food and stuff, yeah.
Your mum loved to use it, didn't she?
Oh, she loved it, yeah.
Anything else you think?
Well, maybe just Dad's story, how he got a job at university, which and Mark, you might correct me if I got it wrong, but yeah, so the story goes, as we talked earlier, Dad sort of studied full-time and worked full-time, and he got his degree, did his dip ed and all that, but he did honours in full-time and working full-time in psychology. And what had happened in the psychology department, in those days university departments only had about three people. There was a vacancy that arose in the department, and because the prof knew Dad and knew being a student and having a very good background, sort of was keen to have him there, even though he didn't have all the academic prerequisites of publishing sufficient material. And so very quickly that was organised. Dad got something published very, very quickly, and then got the job. I don't know whether it was lecturer in the first instance, but he certainly ended up being senior lecturer in the longer run. But it was a bit of, those jobs didn't come up very often, but Dad could then use some of his medical background, but, obviously became an academic there and had a fairly comfortable sort of, I think he enjoyed it a lot. Yeah.
Oh, no, he was just a dedicated academic.
Yeah.
Looked at Dad's appointment, and the salary that he earned as a lecturer or whatever he was at Tas Uni was 2 or 3 times what he was earning as a teacher.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Been told.
So he was lucky that was good fortune really to get that job.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, because that helped them then build the house and set them up nicely, didn't it?
Well, the house was, I mean, the uni lectureship would have been 58, 60, 59, and it would have been 4 years. I mean, I reckon they would have stayed at Moona if the university had stayed at the Domain. Why would they move?
Now that reminds me, was it they used to do a trip to a pine plantation to get some sort of
mushrooms?
Lilydale, near Lilydale, I think, with the Curtis family.
That was a lot later.
That was later. They did all sorts of things later on with people, and they had all sorts of traditions and things which they developed over time, like we all do.
Yeah. I mean, I can recall going up and staying with the Curtises with Grandma, because Grandma, I think it might have been about the time when you were born, sort of. At that stage, I went up there. In fact, Grandma used to do Mrs. Curtis, know her pretty well, and so the Curtises had this farm, and Mrs. Curtis, the elderly, had a unit on it, or
sort of a little chalet.
Thing.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And I can recall Grandpa and I, so it must have been before he died.
Yeah.
Went up on the Tasman Limited and went to Launceston.
So that must have been after 1954.
Yeah. Went to Launceston. I think somebody or other had a house in Cemetery Street there, so we spent the rest of the afternoon there, and then we went out to the farm that afternoon, and I had probably a week there. What was Endel's wife's name?
Trino, yeah.
Yeah, but it was before they had kids even. They had 3 or 4 dairy cows.
Yes.
And so every morning and every night the dairy cows would have to be
needed milking.
Mum in the early days worked out at Cadbury's.
Yes.
I mean, that's why I suspect I was brought up by my grandparents until I was about 4 or 5, because she would get the train out from Moona, because there used to be a train went to Cadbury's, there used to be a train that went to the Zinkies, and so the workers would all go out.
Yes.
And then she'd go out there and was working, and you used to be told about the fact that they were loading trays up manually of chocolates and things. It was fairly intense, I think. But they didn't work in January because it was too hot, and the chocolate factory used to shut down in January, so they'd all be on...
Have a break.
I didn't know that used to happen.
Yeah. And then once I guess she stopped doing that at some stage or other, certainly before you were born.
I remember the story that she had a very bad machine That was whatever process she was using to pack the chocolates, and then once she had a very bad machine, and that was very stressful. And I think that certainly contributed to
there was some stress out there.
Stopping the work out there.
Yeah. But she did Christmas holiday work in Hobart. There was the kids' shop, Miss Muffet, which is in Liverpool Street there, just used to be next door to the bank there. And there used to be a toy shop across the road owned by Mrs. Sick as well, called Polly something or other. And so Mum used to work in those shops during the summertime before Christmas, because Christmas was the busy period. And I can recall I think her friend Sina had a cleaning job up at the Highfield Hotel. And I think a couple of times when Sina went on holidays, Mum did the housekeeping up there for a while.
And Mum, I think she told me how she had to get the first tram of the morning from the depot to get there on time, I think. I remember her also telling me stories when she was selling things that few times she worked out how to sell really well and made quite a lot of sales of clothing, children's clothing, so which she was proud of. But I can't. When I was a youngster, she obviously had stopped totally working.
She would have stopped by. She never worked from Taroona.
Yeah.
This would have all been
65,
from Mona.
Yeah.
And were there any particular foods that either your mum or your dad prepared for you that had links to Estonia?
Well, food. I guess food to some extent all the way through had probably an Estonian flavour to it. I mean, I imagine that we had spuds in most of the time because
lots
Estonians
of potatoes,
eat spuds like nobody's business.
Yeah.
But mainly Estonian food as such would have been made for the celebrations, parties, etc., etc. I mean, they would have inevitably made a big pot of sauerkraut with Viennas and spuds for these events.
Yes.
Mother would have made her torts, which she decorated and kept saying that was the only thing she learned to do in Germany.
So that comes from her German time. Rather than
and
Kringles.
Grandma would have used to make birukad.
Birukad, yeah.
What's that?
It's a pastry dish filled up. It can be filled up with several different fillings. One of them is a carrot filling, and the other one was an egg and mince filling. I did have a go at trying to follow the recipe out here at some stage.
I can always remember the taste of it.
Yeah,
carrots.
when I made it,
Vivid
was
taste.
never the same.
Yeah.
And there was silt, the brawn, silt.
Glimpy soup.
Yeah, there was a bit of that.
So what's glimpy soup? Explain that.
Oh,
what is?
It's a soup with
wheat,
dumplings.
Dumplings, just sort of wheat, sort of out of flour.
Normal dumpling
Dumpling
soup.
soup.
Dumpling soup.
And there's a type of meatloaf as well, Peter.
Bicca boys.
Okay.
Oh, it was meatloaf.
That's just meatloaf, yeah.
Still got a great name though.
Still had which is big boy, yeah.
And they used to make mince aklihagusta,
which I didn't like particularly for some reason. I didn't like the gravy, I don't think.
You ate fish fingers and chips for the first 10 years of your life.
And don't forget rice bubbles and bananas.
Yeah, in the morning.
Yeah.
Yes. And, I mean, out at Moona they had chooks at some stage or other. And... You know, they used to kill a chook every once in a while.
Yeah, I remember one being killed and we ate it. And
yeah, it was fine.
Who would kill the chook?
Dad would kill the chook and clean it.
Yeah.
I mean, this would have, when I can recall it certainly was after Grandpa had died.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was 9 months old when Grandpa died, and that would be about 64 or whenever. what was that again?
Okay, so what was the...
Mum's other delicacy, more for gohobima gork, which is cream cheese cake.
Cheesecake, but it was a baked cream cheese.
It was a bake. It was delicious.
Yeah. It's typical European cream cheesecake.
Yeah.
It's what Polly and I make every Christmas.
Yeah.
Nice.
He uses a Polish recipe, but it'll be the same thing.
And then rice pudding.
Rice pudding used to be made fairly frequently. But she could not cook fish. She used to make a fish sort of casserole, and it was horrible. Yeah. Put me off fish.
And what are these other pastry rolls you mentioned?
They were called Vienna pastries.
Yeah.
And they were a crispy pastry of some sort with fillings, and they were small little rolls. They used to get made for special occasions.
So I've got one question for you, Mart.
Yeah.
What can you remember about Granddad? What was he like? Because I've got he died when I was 9 months old. What was your and you were a very young child, obviously, but what can you remember about him?
I mean, he was diabetic at the end, and so there was lots of this testing, and at that stage, of course, they were using a fairly basic model that you took a urine sample and added drips to it and heated it up and saw what his blood sugar was like. Yeah. And consequently, he was not allowed to eat this and not allowed to do that, but he didn't mind a drink. I mean, they all didn't mind a drink, and they used to drink this straight neat vodka.
Oh, they did vodka, okay.
Which used to be frozen nearly. Yeah, I don't know.
Because remember grandmother, all right? But...
Yeah, well, she was a lot, we had her a lot longer.
Yeah, she died in 74.
Would have been somewhere around there.
Yeah, so I could remember her quite well. And
we've got some photos of your grandfather.
Yeah, we've got photos of
We've got photos.
But yeah.
Well, he died in what?
60.
60, so days, I was 9. I didn't go. I was at school for the funeral. I wasn't taken to it. I was also at school the day you were born.
Well, there you go.
I went off to school. The story went that on the first day of school at Bowen Road, Mum took me down in the morning and put me in and stayed in the class, and in the afternoon he apparently walked down to pick me up at the after school, but I'd come back another way and beat him home by miles. Yeah. And he was fairly keen on his veggie patch out the back, but
that's good. And the question for you, Esti Bavard. Every 3 years it happened. Esti Bavard. I remember we all
went to Sydney in 79.
69. We all went in 69, right? And of course I remember the 78 one because I won the table tennis championship. Esti Sporty Bavard or whatever they were. But 69 we all went. That was the only one we went to together, didn't we?
That was the only one I went to.
Yeah.
You lot went off 3 years after that, and I was left at home by myself.
Yes. So we 70.
Which
was it?
I don't know.
Melbourne. It was Melbourne.
Was it Melbourne?
Yeah.
But Margaret came down first from Terrigal.
Yeah.
And I'd been.
My mother's cousin was Margaret. So.
I'd been working at J.T. Turner's processing fruit.
Yeah. So Mart talked about going up to Launceston on the Tasman Limited with grandmother, and then obviously as I was the second child, I went up to Launceston with my mother, my mum, and I vividly remember catching the train up as well and changing trains at Western Junction and to get to Launceston. Also remember catching the bus back down with mum and all that, but also remember the Estonian community there, the Isers, Elma and Helgi. Was it Helgi Isers? And they had older daughters, older than you, who looked after us in 1970.
Marit and Maya.
Marit looked after us a little bit in 1972 when we went to Estonian Days. That's the one where you were left home. And
yeah, well, she was a bit older.
Yeah, and probably more Latty as Marta Simo, Herbert and Marta, but particularly when Herbert had passed away, Marta was a bit like Dad, lived a long time and was really quite with it. And I used to go and visit her when I was working for in Launceston in the 20 years ago. Anyway, but so there's the linkage between the North and South that did really continue on for all of their lives until, you know, people, like always, you know, they all started thinning out. So that was the only thing I wanted to say at the moment, yeah.